Hello! So it is time for another episode of Spanish Media Wrap-Up, in which I talk about all of the native Spanish media that I have been consuming. So we will start with shows. On Netflix, I watched the show Sagrada Familia. So this is following a family, a mom and two adult children, kind of living on the run-ish or living in under false pretenses, kind of slowly uncover what happened that led them to be in this situation, and there are other characters and dramas going on and that sort of thing. This was entertaining. It was quite ridiculous, lots of wild things happen. It's definitely a very dramatic show. I liked the first season a little bit better than the second season. I feel like the second season drug out a little bit. I don't think it really needed a second season. I think it just needed to finish the story. But, it wasn't bad or anything. It would make a good sick day show, I think, if you just needed something ridiculous to binge watch. I watched Madre de Alquiler, which is a quite long show, and unfortunately that did impact my feelings about it. So we're following a young woman with indigenous origins in Mexico, and she becomes caught up in this plot by this wealthy white family to be the surrogate for their child, which is illegal in Mexico. So all kinds of wild things happen from there, and this really examines exploitation of women in Mexico, racism, classism, all of that kind of stuff. And it was really, really interesting. It was very brutal to watch for sure, because the racism is so explicit, but I did really like it. But again, I just felt like it got really repetitive because it did not have enough plot to keep going for like 24 full episodes. I would recommend this though. A short series on Netflix called Días de Navidad is a 3-part series with kind of like almost movie length episodes, where we're following 4 sisters in Spain during different Christmases of their lives. So the first one, they are children, and then adults, and then older adults. So it's, following different family dramas, different societal traumas kind of, and it was very interesting. I did feel like the time jumps made it really difficult to connect to the characters, but I still enjoyed this. It was a good winter watch, but not my favorite thing I've ever seen. Then I watched one show on rtve Play, and this was Antes de Perder, which is a short show which has also been kind of edited together into just like a movie to watch it all at once. We are following 2 young women who have gotten into trouble, basically leaving their relationships, so done illegal things in exiting their relationships, and they are kind of on the run together through Spain. It was silly, it was wild, kind of endearing, completely forgettable. Then the rest of these were on atresplayer. So the first one, I have no idea how to say this, luimelia, and I watched the first season of this. This is another short form series, so very short episodes. This is following a couple, I believe, that were like side characters in a different show, maybe a famous one, I'm not sure, who are, a queer couple, and so they meet and start dating and stuff over the course of this season, and you're just seeing vignettes from their life together, and I loved this. This was so endearing. I definitely want to continue. The La Novia Gitana is a mystery thriller, really dark crime series that is based on a book that I have not read, but this is following a detective who is trying to discover what happened to these 2 sisters that were both murdered in the same way, and they are Romani. I did really, really like this one. It's definitely not a perfect show, and certainly a very, very explicit, gruesome show, so if that is a concern, then skip this one for sure. Then I watched one episode of a kind of documentary show called Salvados, and the episode was called El Odio Sin Fin, and this is an episode about Palestine and Israel. So the host interviewed a man who is from Palestine but moved to Spain when he was, I think, for university, and then someone else who has dual citizenship with Israel and kind of goes back and forth, I think. So I did not love the way that this episode was carried out. I felt like the interviewer did a lot of the very typical things where, with the Palestinian man, he was always asking him basically to condemn, what they always do. But with the Israeli man, he would let him kind of volunteer that, like he never pushed in the same way. But regardless, I think that this was well worth the watch, and I will probably rewatch it at some point because I think the way that the Palestinian man spoke and expressed himself was so incredible and so impactful. So I do recommend watching it if you have access to it. Then we'll just do the Instagram accounts because the first one is related to that topic, and so it is letstalkpalestine.es, and this is the translated page of Let's Talk Palestine, a well-known account that kind of aggregates news about Palestine, and I have found them, I'm not an expert, but I have found them to be fairly accountable, like if they share something unverified that later proves to not be true, they have always corrected. You can obviously follow and watch their stories and their posts, but they do also have a broadcast channel that is very, very active, sharing updates. So I definitely recommend checking that out. Then another Instagram account is fisicamr, and this is a physics student, I assume a grad student, but I'm not sure, who shares different educational videos about physics topics, which doesn't sound very interesting, but it actually is fairly interesting, and yeah, check it out. And then similarly, the other one is historiaforense, and this is an archaeologist and anthropologist, I believe. I think she has a master's, who also makes videos about related topics, and yeah, very interesting. Then for books. So for some reason I finished like 1 million books in this time period, and also quite a few shows because I got on this kick before I went to Spain where I wanted to clear out most of my currently watching. I don't know why that felt important at the time, but it did. The first one that I finished was La Cosecha Pálida by Josan Mosteiro, and this is a mystery book set in Galicia that is following it's not really following her, but the context is that a young woman has returned home after being missing for multiple years. And she is kind of brainwashed. She's like preaching about the role of women in the society is to be like a homemaker and stuff like that. And no one really has any idea where this came from. She says that she was held by almost like the mole people, something like that. I'm not sure exactly what the translation would be. So we're following I think a journalist and a few other people kind of trying to get to the bottom of this story. I did feel like this was a little bit underdeveloped for what it could have been, but it was entertaining enough. I would read something else from the author. I read Largo, pétalo de mar by Isabel Allende. This is another kind of sweeping saga where the story extends across multiple continents. So we are initially following a family and some acquaintances in Spain during the Spanish Civil War, or at the very beginning of the Spanish Civil War. And so some of them end up having to leave Spain. Some of them are working in like the medical or military, as is often the case in Isabel Allende books. They do end up in Chile. This was really, really interesting, and I really enjoyed it. It was also very fitting to read at this time because the impacts of like war and displacement are obviously very felt in the world right now and always. I don't think this is like my favorite Isabel Allende book ever, but I really, really liked it. So I finished that one in Spain, and I listened to El Descontento by Beatriz Serrano, and this was a really, really interesting listen. So this is kind of a workplace novel, I think is kind of what the genre is known as. So we're following a woman who works at a marketing agency or an advertising agency as like a creative director or something like that. And she very openly says in like the narration of the book that she just got to that title because she was good at like doing as little work as possible and making it look really good. But this is definitely not going to be your like anti-work hero person here. It was kind of no plot, just vibes at first. There does end up being a little bit of a plot, and at the end, you know, I thought the ending was quite ridiculous. It was an enjoyable experience. I'm not like obsessed, but it was very interesting and I enjoyed listening to it. The author has a podcast that I did try to listen to, and I really liked the first 2 episodes. Like, I thought this was going to be a new favorite episode or new favorite podcast. And then I listened to the 3rd episode, which was like against series, and it was some of the most elitist, normal people enjoying things, jerking each other off about their intellectual superiority that I've ever listened to in my life. So having that experience did kind of sour this book in retrospect for me, but I don't think it should. You know, I should be able to still remember it as the experience that I had with it. So the next book I listened to in Spain was, I'm just going to say it how they say it in the book, which is weird because it's not how I would have thought to say it, but it's Ciudad XJ by Cristina Rivera Garza. And this is a Storytel exclusive audiobook, and I don't want it to be. Like, I want it to be released so that they can make a book or an ebook of it very soon, because I need to reread this with the words in front of me. So the premise of this book is that we're in kind of a dystopian society in which men, not all men, but some men have created a city that is exclusively for men. They entirely control immigration. They have built a wall fully around it. And outside of that, you know, society, not that society is breaking down because men aren't there. Society, I think, was already breaking down, and there are still men there. A journalist is invited to Ciudad XJ to write an article about the city of men. And she essentially goes missing. Like, they do not hear from her for, I think, like 15 days. Cristina Rivera Garza is a very abstract writer. So there's a lot going on. It's very complicated. So that's why I need this to be written down so that I can reread it and try to make sense of it as much as the format of her books can be made sense of. But really enjoyed this book. I did understand enough to know that it had really interesting commentary on like the ways that women are excluded, but also that women are still there even when they're being excluded. So yeah. Cantores by Carolina de Robertes. This book was originally written in English, but the author is from Uruguay and she translated her own book into Spanish. So I'm counting it because I want to. And this is the story of 5 queer women growing up, well, not growing up, but in Uruguay during the dictatorship. So it starts in the 1970s and follows them up until relatively modern times. And this was a beautiful book, very beautifully written. I did not love this as much as many people did. I know so many people that gave this 5 stars, raving, amazing reviews, and that is wonderful. For me, it was very, very good. I really, really liked it. So yeah. There were things I didn't love about this, but overall, highly recommend. I read the 4th book in Los Dioses del Norte, which is called El Dragón de la Noche. I have read the previous books in this series and really, really enjoyed them, but it did read like a trilogy, and so I was very curious about what the 4th book was going to be, and I maintain that it read like a trilogy, and this is just kind of a bonus book. So if you want more of the characters, you just really enjoy being in this world, then this is great because you get one more book. If you liked the ending of the 3rd one and you don't feel like you need any more, then you can totally skip this one. But this is a middle grade series set in Basque Country in Spain, and you're following 3 cousins who discover a magical world and things develop from there. So it's a very fun series to read if you like middle grade fantasy. I do highly recommend it. I finally finished La Sombra del Viento. This is obviously a very, very famous book, like arguably maybe the most famous book from Spain other than Don Quixote. And I do not know why, not gonna lie. I started this several months ago, and then I focused on some other things for a while, and then I came back to it and finished it, and it did kind of take like a large effort to finish it, because I just didn't love this. Like, I can see why in some ways people get really drawn in, because the writing is very, very luscious, we could say. This has the most difficult vocabulary of any book that I have read in Spanish. Like, it's not the most difficult to understand, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like when I first started reading Isabel Allende books, I felt like she kind of had complex sentence structures, and then Gabriel Garcia Marquez is even more like that, very complex sentence structures. This is not really so much like that. It is the vocabulary. This is the floweriest book I've ever read in Spanish, and so there were a lot that I just did not look up, because I could just tell that they were adjectives, and I just was like, next, keep going. We're following a young man who goes with his father to the Cemetery of Forgotten Books, I think is what it's called, and he's allowed to pick one book to read, to take from this library and read it. And so he picks this book called La Sombra del Viento, and he's just enraptured by this book. Just so, it's the most magical, engrossing thing that he's ever read. And so he becomes obsessed with trying to find other books by this author, find out anything about the author, and come to find out that this is the only remaining copy of this book. And so he gets swept up into this whole mystery, and obviously there's tons of other things that happen, many other characters and side plots and everything. It is still a very quiet story, I would say. The female characters are appalling, just so awful. This is written by a man, TM. Like, I can read sexist content in a book. It's not like I'm, too sensitive to read it. But when I feel like it's the author's opinions in there, that's where it starts to get like, ooh. So yeah, I do plan to give the second book a try, because I do own it. So, we're gonna give it a shot. So speaking of books with sexist and racist content that I didn't feel like were the author's opinion, El Vampiro del Vivre by Hector Zagal, I think, is a very, very fascinating book that I listened to. I believe the author is a historian, along with other academic things, and so this is set in colonial Mexico, so it's called Nueva España. We are following many characters, but among them a nun who is the richest woman in Nueva España. And so she has a lot of, fictional privileges that people would not have actually had. So she, eventually is kind of pulled from her convent to try to figure out what is going on with this rash of deaths that appear to be from vampires. It was a wild ride. Like, again, a book that sounds really dramatic, but was actually quite level paced, almost kind of a dark academia fantasy type book. We're kind of in the time of like the conflict between the church and enlightenment and all this, power dynamics and everything, and obviously the, colonial powers, and all kinds of interesting things like that are talked about at length. Also, dessert is talked about so much. There were things that annoyed me about the plot of this book, but overall, I enjoyed it so much, and I will be following the author to hopefully read some more of his books, because it was really entertaining. Then I read Los Peligros de Fumar en la Cama by Mariana Enriquez. I have a reading vlog on my other channel where I read this, but I don't talk about it that much. This is a short story collection by the horror author Mariana Enriquez from Argentina, and she writes generally about social, political issues, like child abuse, homelessness, all kinds of different things like that. And yeah, this was a fascinating read. I did feel like the issues that she talks about were a little bit more easy to identify, basically. Like, I love the book Las cosas que perdimos en el fuego, which is also a short story collection by her, and I do feel like the connections between the issues and the absolutely outrageous, wild horror stories were clearer in Los peligros de fumar en la cama, but simultaneously I also wasn't quite as captured by as many of the stories. So, but I do think this one is more popular, and so like a little bit more well received generally. So then finally I read Preguntas Frecuentes by Nona Fernandez. This is very tiny. This is actually, I had no idea when I bought this or started it, but this is actually a pandemic book. It is kind of an intertwined story from two different narrators in kind of a multimedia type format, as per usual for this author, telling both the story of lockdown, and one of them was in a car accident as a child where some family members passed away. And so it's kind of dealing with those two traumas in conversation between these two narrators, and interspersed there are these FAQs from the government of Chile. Tons of stuff packed into this very, very tiny book, but I really, really liked it. Probably not like my favorite read of all time or anything, but it was really good. Okay, so that is everything. I filmed this video one time before, and I am not exaggerating when I say that I am not sure that I made a coherent description of a single thing. Wow, this has just been a disaster. I hope that this one made a little bit more sense, because I am not filming this again. I think that I should get on a better schedule here where these aren't coming out quite as often. I had a little bit of a backlog, and so they've been coming out more often than I intended. And also, I will be publishing a database with all of the things that I've ever talked about in Spanish media wrap-ups that will be on my Ko-fi, and hopefully if things happen, then on my Patreon as well. If you don't want to watch the backlog of all of these videos, you can just do that, and it'll be updated every time I make a new video. So, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.